Hi everyone, this is the first in a series of videos where I want to talk to you about VO2 max training, how important it is, how to schedule it, and how, most importantly, how to do it really well. VO2 max, is it important? Well, yes, it's necessary. You need a high VO2 max in order to be able to perform really well. It's the maximum amount of oxygen that you can utilize for your sporting performance. So really it acts as the ceiling. It's the ultimate level of performance that you can achieve. Now, in real terms, it's about the pace or the power that you can sustain for somewhere between 6 and 8 minutes. So in real terms, it's very short. We know we can measure it in a laboratory, and we can also measure it and estimate it from field tests, give or take a small percentage. But to train it effectively needs a very considered approach. So what I want you to think about is just training in zone 5, whether that's pace or power, which is a zonal training system that's been described based on your FTP, is not necessarily training your VO2 max. We could probably say that you're running at VO2 pace, or you're cycling at VO2 power, but whether you're actually improving, building or progressing your VO2 max is up for debate, I think. So that's what I'd like to get across in the next number of sessions. Now, what I'll finish this first video by saying is that as far as sporting performance in triathlon in particular is concerned, VO2 max is probably nothing like the top determiner of who would win or who would place well comparative to the other people racing. These are some of the much more important factors for triathlon. So whilst I am going to talk about VO2 max, just to put it in context right from the very start, I don't think it's the main number that we should be considering, that we should be worried about, and that we should be trying to build. Okay, so here are some of the things that are much more important in my mind. So fatigue resistance, your ability to undergo a lot of workload and not deteriorate, whether that's your form, as in swimming, or whether it's your power output or pace when running. That's really important, and it's still an emerging part of the sports science at the moment. We've also got your thresholds. We know that if we're only given one number to go off, it would be your FTP. That would be able us to describe the different abilities within a group of cyclists. Similarly with your 10K time or your threshold pace for running. But equally LT1, the lower lactate threshold, is really important for triathlon because that is closer to the race pace for most of us for middle and longer distance racing. And then similarly, we've got economy and pacing. So we've got how well you can run at a given pace and save substrate, save utilization of carbohydrate, and maybe continue to burn fats. Pacing things well, your ability to judge effort level and maintain steady pace rather than blowing up. Obviously, that's really important. And knowing how to pace a particular race course, where to put extra effort in, where to save energy, for instance. That's really important too. Obviously, this is a big area, is fueling for triathlon. We know that if we don't fuel well, the race day will go badly, irrespective of how fit we were. We've obviously, as far as the bike is concerned, we've got aerodynamics, and we know that two people of similar fitness able to push out the same power. The one that is more aerodynamic with a better CDA is likely to be moving quicker and therefore to finish the race quicker. And then the final one at the bottom is just, it's you and your ability to execute your race plan. And when the shit hits the fan and things start to go wrong and the day changes, can you adapt that plan and still get the best out of yourself? Can you be mentally resilient and have the clarity of thought to be able to adjust your plan and get the best result on any given day? And that again is a skill that can be developed. So irrespective of where your VO2 max is and where it ends up in the future, all of these other things are amenable to huge training scope within your training plan. Let's start with the anatomy and the biology that's important for understanding VO2 max. As we said in the first video, VO2 max means the maximum volume of oxygen that you can take in from the air surrounding you and utilize within the tissues of your body. And here in exercise and sports performance, we're talking about the muscles mainly. So what do we need and what's the process that's going on? So obviously the air around us contains oxygen. We breathe in the air, so the first thing we need is good lung capacity. Ideally, we want a big set of lungs that can take in as much air as possible. And we want the biggest surface area of alveoli that we can possibly have. So alveoli are the small little sacs deep within our lungs that are just very, very thin and allow oxygen to move from the air into the blood and allows carbon dioxide to move from the blood back into the air in our lungs to be expelled. So firstly, we need a really good, strong, big set of lungs that work really, really well. So lung capacity, really important. The next step in the chain is for our heart to pump the blood efficiently. So the bigger our heart is and the more quickly it can beat, that would raise this maximal capacity of our system to push oxygen to where it's needed. So that's the next thing to consider, is how strong and how big is the heart. One of the main training adaptations we get from VO2 max type of training is an enlarged heart. It's not an enlarged heart in a bad way. It's something called the athlete's heart. It's a training effect where, in particular, the left side of the heart, the left ventricle, which pumps blood around the body, gets bigger and thicker. It gets bigger in its volume, so it can handle more blood, it can stretch further, and therefore it can have a greater contraction capacity. So essentially it works better. The term for that is stroke volume. Stroke volume is the amount of blood that you can pump out for every one single heartbeat. So stroke volume goes up as a result of VO2 max training, and obviously you can sometimes train your heart rate to beat a little faster. When we put the two together, if we have a heart that can beat very fast and we have a heart that can handle a lot of blood, it would allow us to pump more blood around the body and with it more oxygen, so it would raise our VO2 max. So the heart is the second step. The third step is the blood vessels. We know that with more endurance training, we can build new blood vessels. It takes quite a long time, but even our lower effort level training, our endurance training, zone 2 type training, can help us build a capillary network to get the blood and the oxygen everywhere that it's needed. And the greater the network that we have, again, it's likely our VO2 max will go up because we can use that oxygen in more of our muscle tissue, so that the value would go up. And then the final step is just the gas exchange at the tissue level. So once the oxygen is in the blood, in those final small capillaries that supply the muscle, then we need a mechanism to get the oxygen across into the muscle and perhaps bring the carbon dioxide back from the muscle tissue into the blood to be expelled through the breath again later. So that's the process that is necessary for us to utilize oxygen. And the better that system works, the higher our VO2 max will be. Now, as I've said before, all of our training can affect this. It's not just VO2 max training, but when we do consider very specific VO2 max intervals, then it's really a training response of the heart that we're looking at. And that's the true measure of how effective our VO2 max training is likely to be. Now, the final word here is when you look at the numbers, the actual true value is a whole number. It's in litres per minute. It's an absolute value. So it might be, say, 5 litres per minute. That's the maximal amount of oxygen you can use. Now, we're more familiar these days with the body weight relative term. So if you then divide that by your weight in kilograms, it would give you a number that's more likely 50 something or 60 something, or if you're very lucky, 70 something. And that is your milliliters of oxygen used per minute per kilogram of body weight. And that then allows us to compare people of different sizes and statures. Okay, so there's our introduction to VO2 max, the basic biology and physiology, so that we can move on and talk about how to train it. In the last video, I mentioned how one of the key components of VO2 max training is its ability to train the heart as a muscle, and for that to get bigger and to get stronger. So let's think about what you have to do within your VO2 max training sessions to actually develop a stronger heart. The first thing to say is that you are going to have to work incredibly hard. What's important to understand is that for already fit and capable individuals with a long history of training, your stroke volume will continue to increase right up until you're almost at maximal heart rate, so well past your threshold heart rate. So why is that important? Well, stroke volume is the amount of blood that you can pump in every heartbeat, and we want that number to get bigger as we train our heart. Now, to get the best training response, we need to ensure that our heart is beating very, very, very fast, within about 95% of its absolute maximum, in order to ensure that we are maximally stressing the heart muscle. So that means that the blood rushing back to the heart is coming back in so forcefully that it stretches the heart muscle, and then we'll get adaptations to the heart. Just like doing plyometric training with your running or your weightlifting, we can improve the capacity of the muscles to generate force. This is essentially a form of eccentric loading for the heart muscle, and particularly for the left ventricle. In the bottom here, the left ventricle is the part of the heart that's responsible for pumping blood out around your body once it's got oxygen in it from your lungs, and this is the part of the heart that shows real good capacity for expansion and for increasing that stroke volume. But because your stroke volume will get a little bit larger and larger, all the way right up close to your maximal heart rate, it needs you to train at close to maximal heart rate to get the best response from your heart. So it's important in your training that you simply aim for high heart rate response from the training that you do. And then we're looking to maximize within one training session the amount of time that your heart rate was in the desired region. So whether you structure that with HIIT interval style, 40-20s or 30-15s, and that's the structure, or whether it's a more traditional VO2 max training session with 3-minute intervals or 4-minute intervals, or whether it's something slightly different to that. There are numerous ways that you can do this, which we'll go on to. But the main thing is, when you're looking back at the data from that session, you really want to maximize the amount of time that your heart rate was around about 95% of heart rate max. And that way you can be as certain as possible when you're doing your training out in the real world and not in the laboratory that you are actually working at your VO2 max level. If you do VO2 max pace, but don't hold it for long enough, or don't repeat it often enough, or rest too long between the intervals, if you do VO2 max power on the bike and follow the same pattern, yes, you will hit the desired pace and the desired power, but you likely won't actually develop your VO2 max. Okay, let's move on now and look at some of the main principles for VO2 max training, which you can apply to any modality, any type of exercise that you want to apply to it. Some suit better than others. The first one, a really, really important one, is choose an exercise modality that you can recruit the most amount of muscle mass to perform the movement. So rowing is a very, very good one, because you're using both upper body and lower body at the same time. Same as cross-country skiing would be. So maybe an elliptical could be used for this if we're thinking outside of the traditional triathlon training box. The reason we need to do that is if we recruit as much muscle mass as possible, the demand for oxygen will be as high as it can possibly be. In some other forms of sports where it's isolated just to the leg muscles, perhaps, we might not quite see the same total amount of oxygen usage. So we can probably achieve VO2 max a little easier if we choose an exercise that's using the whole body. Although, as we know, we can still do it on something like a bike, where the upper body is largely immobile and fixed. So it can still be done on biking. We're looking for a heart rate response as the main measure of VO2 max. What you'll feel while you're doing these sessions is that your heart is beating literally out of your chest, and also that your breathing rate is very, very high. It's quite raspy, it's quite uncontrolled. You're breathing almost at a maximal ventilation rate as well at the same time. So if heart rate is extremely high, breathing rate is extremely high, then we can be as sort of confident as possible without testing in the laboratory that we're close to VO2 max. If you want to measure your heart rate, it wants to be getting up to around 95% of your maximum heart rate. That's another way to have confidence that you're getting close to your VO2 max. As the main effect of these hard VO2 max intervals is a central cardiovascular effect, particularly as far as the heart structure is concerned, then it doesn't really matter what exercise modality you choose. There will be good crossover. If your VO2 max training is all on the bike, you will still get that same heart response when you go to run or swim. So there's crossover here, quite a large crossover between the sports. Obviously, if you're looking strictly at performance benefit, then doing the VO2 max training in the discipline that you really want to get better at makes a lot of sense. Now, when it comes to doing the intervals, we're probably looking for 15 to 20 minutes of work at VO2 max effort. So this is where you get your standard sort of 3x5 minutes or 4x4 minutes, etc. Normally, if you're working at this effort level, 15 minutes is kind of the minimum sort of requirement to really get some good benefit, but it's unlikely that you'd do more than 20 minutes. That session would become incredibly difficult and perhaps leave you in too much of a fatigue state for the coming days to come. The main aim here is not to blow up. We're working close to maximally, but if you attack interval 1 like it is a 3 or 4 minute max effort, you're not likely to get through the session. So I describe it more as a maximal effort, but knowing that you've got another 2 reps to come or another 3 repetitions to come. It's close to your best effort, but if we just truly ask you to do 1 effort, you would probably go a little bit harder still. So that's the most important thing there. Don't force interval 1. And then do keep the recoveries quite short. So with VO2 max training, you might use a 1-to-1 ratio. So a 3-minute interval would have a 3-minute rest. Research seems to suggest that 2 minutes is actually required. So I wouldn't ever drop the recovery to less than 2 minutes. But if we can get closer to 2 minutes rather than 3, 4 or 5 minutes for the recoveries, we'll get a better benefit from the session. Your overall power or pace production might be a little bit lower during the interval, but you're more likely to be at or working very close to VO2 max because you've not allowed heart rate to settle between the intervals quite so much. Your body is still under some continued stress from the previous interval, hasn't fully recovered when you go into the next interval, and that will build throughout the session. Obviously by interval 4 or 5, you're struggling and you're getting close to the end of your energy reserve levels at that point. Remember that these sessions do produce quite a very strong anaerobic effect as well as a very strong aerobic effect. So you need to be well motivated, you need to be well fueled, and you need a strong anaerobic system to get through these sessions as well. During the session, monitor your breathing as well as your heart rate, and that will tell you if you're in the right ballpark. Don't necessarily expect to be there in interval number 1, so don't worry if your first 3-minute interval, for instance, you're not quite getting the heart rate response that you'd require. That may only start to come in interval 2, and equally as you go through the session, each of your intervals should have a higher proportion of time up at your 95% target heart rate. So it will look better, it will look like you're achieving more as you get through the session. So the key thing here is that we've got to complete the workout. As it says here, we've got to get through the whole of the interval schedule. As I've said before, for triathlon, the bike suits this very, very well. I would be a bit cautious doing it running unless you've got a very low injury, history of injuries with running, and there's low risk for you particularly. And I would therefore do it obviously in a safe environment like a track if you're going to do that. Tools do work very well for this, whether you want to do them on the bike or running, then utilising a hill rep structure of about 3 to 5 minutes per rep works really, really well, because naturally you get the recovery on the way down. Obviously, particularly on the bike, that works really, really well. In this video, I'd like to look at helping you to understand how to set up a good quality VO2 max workout that achieves the best for that, say, 30 to 40 minutes main set of work that you've got available in your day here to get a good fitness benefit. So we've covered a lot before. Now I just want to look at the interval structure basically and how you can progress that over time. So we've said we're looking for 15 to 20 minutes of interval work. In that, we want to keep the recoveries as short as possible, not exceeding a 1-to-1 ratio, and maybe looking to shorten it down a little further from that so that we're not recovering more than is strictly needed to get through the session. So typical interval structures are a more steady state. We might see 5 by 3 minutes with 3 minutes recovery. We might see 4 by 4 minutes with 4 minutes recovery. And that's absolutely fine. They would achieve 15 or 16 minutes of time in zone. So time in zone is what we're really looking at here. Obviously then, if you're starting with those steady state intervals, you could progress to add 1 extra interval. You could also progress by reducing the recovery time. That obviously makes it harder to hit the paces and hit the power targets, but it probably achieves the goal of having higher heart and breathing rates because you've had less recovery. So you might start with 3-minute recoveries and the next week drop them to 2 minutes 30, and then perhaps 2 minutes 10, and then 2 minutes. So sometimes you can really progress a session without making it harder during the work periods, but you can make either the recoveries a little harder, or what I like to do here with the VO2 max workouts is make the recoveries a little shorter. And again, I would always preserve the recoveries for these steady state workouts at 2 minutes. I would never reduce it past 2 minutes. I think the workout quality really suffers if you bring it down too far. The alternative to that is to do it more as an on-off kind of hit style, like a surge and a recover. And what we see most often here is something like a 40-20 split. So we're looking at a work period that is twice as long as the recovery, but they're both kept quite short. You would tend to do these in blocks. So you'd have a block of 40-20s that takes about 10 minutes. So that would be 10 repetitions before you then get a longer recovery, which could be 3 to 5 minutes. Again, keep that as short as possible. 3 minutes, I think, works quite well. We then repeat the 40-20s, take another 3-minute recovery, and then repeat the 40-20s again. So again, that would be 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes is good here of work period, because obviously we're not working consistently for that whole period of time. There's very similar benefits from this style of workout. The success can be down to personal preference. If you much prefer the short bursts with regular recoveries, and that allows you to get your breathing rate and heart rate higher and keep it there and enjoy the session, there's absolutely no harm in you doing the HIIT style. If you prefer to just get in the zone like a diesel engine, turn the turbo up and whack it on and just hit that consistent delivery of power till you get a more like a longer recovery at 3 minutes later, then that is fine as well. It's really down to personal choice. We might also look at the data and find that in one of the sessions you're achieving those outcomes better, so you do feel that you're working harder, that your heart rate and your breathing rate are higher, then that's probably the one to go for. If you have a very good anaerobic capacity, you might be able to smash out the short 40-20s and replenish that anaerobic capacity without your heart and breathing rates being taxed quite so much. And so if you are very strong anaerobically, the more continuous 3 or 4 or 5 minute intervals probably work better. Equally, if you're looking for something a little bit different in your training, you're looking for more of a neuromuscular aspect, because every time you've got to accelerate on the bike or the running, you've got to accelerate from a slow speed or a low leg speed on the bike, you've got to increase the torque and you've got to put more energy into the system. Obviously, when you do a 3-minute interval, you only do that once and then you hold a consistent effort. When you do 40-20s, you're doing that at least 10 times within a 10-minute window. So there's a lot more acceleration, there's a lot more higher force production just in the initial part of each interval. So there are some nuanced differences between the structures, but it doesn't really matter which you choose. Then look to progress it. Once you are achieving what you want to, look to progress every week or two, and just consider how long you want to do this type of training for. I think for most people, if you really wanted to do it and cram it into a short period of time, maybe 2 sessions a week for 3 to 4 weeks, and that's like 6 or 8 of these sessions. Equally, the more standard way of doing it would be a 6 or 8 week block of VO2 max training, and you would do 1 a week, because it is really quite taxing both mentally and physically to hit these numbers and these effort levels. And the final note really is to say then is look at your data afterwards and see how much time in zone you've achieved. So if we use that 95% maximum heart rate as the goal of your whole workout, and you can do this very easily on Training Peaks, look at how much time you spent with your heart rate very close to or above 95% of its maximum, and then each week try to manipulate the variables within the workout to try and get a few more seconds or maybe a minute extra of that time, and that's probably what will produce the benefits here. We're at the final video just to summarize VO2 max and its training, and specifically within triathlon. Use it wisely. So the first thing is, don't overuse it. Don't use it week in, week out. Don't use it multiple times per week, and basically use it as part of your seasonal progression. You might use it in small doses throughout the season just to keep this top end physiology trained. You might use it more consistently as a block to really develop this sort of physiology, but don't just continuously hit these hard sessions week in and week out, and certainly be very cautious if you're going to try to do more than 1 per week. The next thing is, obviously, remember something that I mentioned previously was that VO2 max is not the same as riding or running at your VO2 max power or pace zone that's been defined by a threshold test. So if I choose a power that's zone 5 and my Coggan and Allen zones on the bike, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm training my VO2 max. That means I'm riding at VO2 power, but that's based on my threshold test. To get to VO2 max, what I really need to do is monitor my heart rate and my breathing, as it says again here. And we want to achieve high heart rate and high ventilation rate, almost close to maximum. If we do that, we can be fairly certain that we're working at VO2 max, which is the goal of the session. Now, that often needs a lot of power, a lot of pace, and a lot of effort, but it doesn't necessarily mean just sticking to the zones. Okay, so that's quite important, I think, here. These are very stressful, but they are very powerful. They can provide a great boost to your fitness, and they are also very anaerobic, not just aerobic. So we think of them as being maximally aerobic, developing your aerobic system. But to get to these extremely high power and pace levels, you've got to use a lot of anaerobic energy. So they are good for the anaerobic system as well, but they will demand a lot of glycogen usage. They're going to need a lot of fuel, which is going to mainly, if not totally, come from blood sugar and the sugar stored in your muscle. So you need to be quite well rested, you need to be quite well fed, and you need to be extremely well motivated to get through these sessions. So consider that angle as well. So that's the summary. VO2 max training, definitely worthwhile, but possibly in some situations overutilized. As we've said, VO2 max is not the biggest determinant of triathlon performance, but it is necessary to be good at triathlon. Okay, leaving you with that thought. If you think it's worthwhile, I could do something very similar on threshold training. Just maybe let me know in the comments.